Hello, everyone. Excuse me. Long day, and I'm figuring my shit out. And hopefully that will work when I restart this one. Yeah, I gotta restart this. Yeah, fuck, I'm not restarting. That's good. All right. A long day of being outside in the rain and doing all kinds of fun rain shit. So that was good. A lot of good. And now, yeah. Now I'm going to bring it over to the screen and let's go. Part two of the Varangian is the part two, the warrior, chapter 20. Upon the rivers. Myself a nice horn of mead to do this with. Ah. Mm. From the Golden Sound, the galley had sailed north through the Bosporus, and when they found a suitable island, they deposited the princess there with a sack of food and 2 skins of water. She'd said nothing the entire time, even after removing the gag. She mostly just muttered prayers. When she was finally set down, Harald kissed her on the cheek and told her he'd leave her with a small contingent of warriors for her protection. These men are here to protect you against any harm that might be found. Worry not, my dear. The Empress is a loving woman, and will be searching most earnestly for you. You need but wait. Now, what to tell the Empress for myself? That is a question I have thought much on. I could ask you to tell her how little her order means to me, as I have flown so swiftly from the embrace of her city. I could also ask you to relay how little power her influence was over me, as we could so easily take you from your bed. I could ask that you tell of how well treated a noble-born woman is to we the Varangian. And instead of all these things, I will ask only that you tell her, truly from me, Harald Sigurdsson, we are free. He'd said, and then returned to the ship, and they'd continued north. Harald told them all that she had asked to be taken with them, which he refused. Some believed him. The winds were right enough for them to raise the sails, and so they flew all through the night, until they arrived at and sailed out into the Black Sea. Upon the long ship, after the energetic flight from the city and the leaving of the princess, the mood was tense and the air quiet. None spoke for the fatigue they all experienced together. Fortunately, the extra hands and the good winds meant they could sleep, only having to leave a few awake for the watch. Their first priority, once they reached the land of the Rus, was to find another ship. The one they had was a good and sturdy longship, but it had just enough room, for all. Regardless, they did want more place for all to sit comfortable. Once again, fortune favored them, as they were well used to raiding and taking what they needed. At midday, when they sighted the coast of the Ruslands, Harald decided it was time to raise the spirits and chase away the ghosts. Open that barrel! Pass a horn to everyone on this ship! We drink now, with the mead Helgi here brewed. A cup was poured out to each one upon the ship. They each of them all waited, of course, for everyone to have some, and then they raised their mead together. To Miklagard, Harald bleated. To Miklagard, they all responded, and poured out a sip into the water overboard for the city that had been their home for some for 10 years or more. Then they drank of the golden mead. We drink now of mead made from honey that was from the Mediterranean lands, brewed with water that was taken from the cisterns of Miklagard herself. This is a draught of that home. Who will remember Miklagard? He prompted. I will remember. the gaunt, scald Thjolfur said, boldly going first. I remember the grand, strange music they played in the court. Those stringed instruments these Byzantines made wine for our listening. I will miss that noise. Hail, they responded. They who similarly loved this thing drank. I will remember the stark-skinned women, Harald's strong arm said. Many a night did I share my great strength and warmth with them. Hail, all of the men said and drank. Many of the women rolled their eyes. I will remember the figs, Bodil said. So sweet a fruit as that must surely be a blessing from their god. I sacrificed many to the fire that they may be feasted on in the hall of the gods. Hail! I will remember, Fitzbjörn began. I will remember the great plundering, the raiding, the prowess of our being there. I will remember the glory of being a Varangian. Ever shall I go by this name if caught. Even if you go by no other, the commander said. All laughed. Hail, Harald said, and when the laughter had dwindled some. I too think on your mind. Hail! Hail! They all said together, with respect clear in their tone. I will remember, said a man named Thorgil, the night's air, thick like a syrup and warm no matter what time of year. I will be remembering in the cold of the Danish lands I call home. Hail! I will remember, Havald said, breaking the solemn wistfulness. The great war rage that was every day in this Mediterranean, fighting in the sands of Palestine, the far reaches of the Crescent, the heat of Africa and in Sicily. Ever shall my mind be brought to the fury of those battles. Yea, Brynulf! 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 They chanted. He stood with his arms out to the sides, taking in the praise. Hail! I will remember, a woman named Fredi said. The spice market. I will always remember walking through the bazaar and breathing in that pungent air. It felt like I was smelling all of the world in one walk. Hail! I will remember, Niels said. You, all of you bold and brave warriors, taking the shores of the Circlands, fighting through the streets of Miklagard. I will remember boldly as we took castles with the great feats of strength and cunning in Sicily. I will remember Gerger's face when you, Lord, drew your lot from the back, and he had to either accept defeat or bawl like a child in front of us all. Everyone laughed. I will remember, too, your entrance after we came to sack the prison, and you were already out, walking up to rally us. Hail! Skål! I will never forget that day, Helgi said. Harald of Norway cut the eyes off the Emperor of Rome. Such a thing seems like it should be impossible to contemplate. I will remember, said one of the serving women, who decided to come with them. Her Norse was improving, and she spoke carefully now. I will remember Longsail. Your North drink alike. She held up a curved horn of the mead to emphasize her point. Her name was Arianna, and wore furs and a tunic now, in dramatic contrast to how she'd been dressed during her time in the Longsail. She looked suddenly around at all who looked at her, listening, and grew shy. She spoke some hushed words to Harald in Greek. Harald responded, shaking his head. She thinks her speech not enough for our ears, but we want more of her memory, do we not? They all agreed and encouraged her. Arianna lifted her head and tried more. More is the fish. I like fish, she completed, and everyone aboard the ship went wild with cheering for her effort. Hail, Arianna! They shouted. I will remember you, Arianna, Harald said, turning to her and putting a hand on her shoulder. I will remember how you slapped me right here when I first saw this gorgeous body of yours. She took his hand from her shoulder and pointed a finger in his face as warning threat, and all laughed. Hail, he said, raising his cup, and they all drank together. Soon will we have a new ship. Then you can be on board there, away from me, he said in Greek to her. Will you translate for me? Asked the broad Stephanos. Of course, friend. Stephanos says here that he will remember serving in the guard of Constantinople, alongside we Varangian guard, and he is ready for adventure to come as he continues to sail with us. Hail, they replied, and all drank. And ever shall you be a welcome friend and warrior with us. None could be so strong as to arrest me as you did. They shared a laugh. I need more, someone said. I am finished my cup too, said another. That's enough for now, you dogs. You know what I will remember. I will remember that you are called the Emperor's wineskins, and not for lack of reason are you known by that name. I thought, Theodorfer said, I thought you cut off the Emperor's wineskin, he said with a raucous grin, and all laughed together. Harald loudest of all. I will never forget that myself, Harald said. What a life God has chosen for me to live. And now I return to the north. Who can foretell what this place will hold? I have much I have to pay back to many there. Many of those sailing aboard turned back to their conversations, as Harald spoke not to they, but more to himself. When fully crewed, they need only 3/4, those on board rowing, as there weren't enough oars for everyone to partake. Now, at the relaxed pace, they wound their way through the rivers in these lands, and the added sailors who struggled to find somewhere to sit, only half were set to rowing. In this fashion did they spend the rest of the day, these rowing, passing the duty off as they needed, and those not rowing taking the time to sleep and eat and talk among themselves as the scenery flowed by. Distant smoke halted all their activity and brought attention to the riverbank. The smoke could be from a settlement or a village, but if it was on the side of a river, it could also have a boat they could take through strength. They'd not been away from Miklagard a month yet, and they plotted out a raid. They halted their progress and planned to arrive at the smoke's origin just at nightfall to take the place by surprise. Weapons and shields were ready, and the archers stretched for the attack. The food aboard the ship was dwindling too with each day, and so they decided to make the raid even if there was no ship for them to take. When the sun fell below the horizon, they rowed out the ship again, making their way down the wide river and around the bend until the settlement was in sight. It was immediately apparent that this was a fishing hamlet without the means for a ship larger than a small rowboat, but a plunder of river fish was no small thing, and so they pressed on. Harald had asked if anyone spoke the language of the Rus, and some knew it. These would be instrumental in finding out where to go looking for more ships. The people of the village saw the huge hulking warriors approaching and started to run in panic at the sight. A raiding longship was a terrible sight to any who knew what it brought. Fitbjorn looked at the people and wondered if any among them would know how to fight at all. He doubted it, but would be ready regardless. They drew closer and closer, and he heard others around him starting to growl. I am the bear, he heard from Hofvald. Bear Stormhunter! said another. The growls grew among them all. An arrow flew from the village and was caught on a shield. All shields were brought up to protect against any more that might come. But there was no volley that fell upon them. Another arrow came, same as the first, and it was plain that it was a hunting bow being turned on them. Too little to stop such a tide as they. The ship grated against the sand of a small earthen beach, and the Vikings jumped from the railing into the waters to wait for the village. The Vikings went running through the dirt streets and quickly overran everything there. Fitbjorn did not have his shield out before him. He only held his axe and sought around his vision to see if he could spy the archer. If that man got a lucky shot in, it would be worse for him. A man emerged from a home and froze as he saw the great helmed warrior before him. He wore simple, rough clothing, and so posed no threat at all. Fitbjorn twisted and drove the axe through his neck with a clean cut. The man fell with a spray of blood and a strangled cough. He died quickly as he plummeted to the ground and landed hard on the earth. A scream came from within the home, but Fitbjorn moved on. There would be others to search out a store of food they might have. Other villagers were being killed around him, and it was quickly apparent that they'd not find a warrior in this whole place. Light the torch. Give me your flame. I wish to fire this house, a raider called Dormund said. No, Fitbjorn said, seeing there were people in the house. He walked over to the man. There are women in there. Have you looked for food in the house? Don't waste plunder needlessly. Dormund nodded. Right, you are black hair. What of that one? No. Go check in the house first. I'm sure there is food you are about to destroy. Bring the loot out, and then you can burn it down as you wish. I will take good advice. You are a hard man, black hair. You know this. What do you think the women love me best? They laughed, and Fitbjorn ran off to explore more. He walked between the houses being looted and turned after the last one on his right, seeing then that there was a shack at the far end of a small grass field near the woods. He wondered that it might be a storehouse of some kind, so he went for it. From the position of the initial attack, it was probable that the archer was to his right and behind him, and in a moment of caution, he turned to see no one there hiding at the backs of the houses. When he turned again to the shack, he saw someone in the forest. She was young, perhaps 15, and she was aiming her bow at him. He wore now all his armor and feared not an arrow from her bow, but he didn't want her to attack him. Fitbjorn stopped and stood facing her, his axe held easily within his hands. The stance was not aggressive, only ready. There was nothing for him to do but wait and see what she decided to do. Release the arrow she held aimed at him, in which instance he was fully prepared to run her down, or she could flee. She said something in her Slavic tongue, and he stood there. It was clear to see that she was crying as she spoke. She certainly wanted something. Even in the dim light, he could see her face as she bit her lip and looked to the arrow she held. You have to decide now. Others will come, and I am sure there are some of them who'll not care and will take you rather than kill you. You have to decide now. He snapped her attention back to him and breathed out loudly through her nose. Then she turned and sprinted into the woods like a deer. His shoulders relaxed and he continued breathing as naturally as he had been the whole time. Finally, he carried on to the shack to see what it was, but upon inspection found only farm tending tools. He closed the door and went back to the shack, behind the shack to piss. When he was done this, however, he saw another wooden hut deeper in the forest and sighed. He would need to see that there wasn't a hidden store there either. Fitbjorn used his axe to push aside ferns and branches as he walked through the dark forest to get to it. As he approached, however, he heard a hushed and urgent voice. The voice was feminine and definitely young. The girl had probably run around and come back here for some reason. He paused to listen to see if any other voice came to speak to her. He thought he heard a softer, muffled voice, but it was hard to listen in the sound-deadening forest. Silently creeping through the underbrush, he came to realize soon that the voice was of an old man or woman. It wasn't completely distinct, still being filtered through the wood of the poor hut. There was a light coming from the opening on the other side, so this place would be protected from view of those in the village. He crouched by the door side and could clearly hear it was an old woman now, the girl's grandmother perhaps? The old voice was certainly consoling the young girl, but it didn't sound like it was helping. She sounded like she was pleading. He could imagine she was begging the old woman to run with her, fly from the village, and seek safety in the forest. Regardless of how the girl had treated him, he needed to know what was in the hut, and so he leaned around the corner and looked within. The girl shrieked at the sight of him and jumped back. He wasn't certain if any would hear this, but it didn't matter now. The girl had the hunting bow around her shoulder and had a thick brown fur pelt over her back. She put an arm in front of the wrinkled woman, who only looked at him with curiosity. He thought she must be past her wit in this life. But then she reached and put a hand out toward him. The young one said something insistent, but the woman didn't listen. Fitbjorn leaned forward in his own curiosity. She put her hand on his helmet, and a look of such deep inspection. Fitbjorn looked between the two and realized he was in no danger. He took off his helmet. Both women looked at his face, his beard, his long black hair. The old woman put forth her hand again and touched his face now. She said something again, something in her tongue, and a look of reverence came over her face. She said the word again, Durin. She then turned to the girl and said something to her. The girl stood. Wait, what? Fitbjorn said. You'll be found if you go. He then felt the nails of the old woman digging into his flesh and yelped in surprised pain as he looked back to the woman. She had her claws in his cheek, and he went for the knife at his belt. She grabbed his other hand, though, with the strength he did not expect, and put something into it, saying more of her native gibberish. He felt blood trickling down his beard and looked into his hand to see a small leather sack had been put there. The pain of the scratch overcame his rational self, however, and he lunged forward with the knife, plunging it deep into her chest and landing on her. The blade was driven down deep, and he felt her ribs cracking under his weight. Her frailty broke beneath his might, and he was left there panting at the energy of the moment. Alone. He looked around and could not see the girl anywhere. He stood and kicked at the fire after quickly looking about to find there was nothing here of value. He paused a moment before all the embers were scattered in total disarray and made a decision. Quickly, stowing the strange pouch the woman had given him, he emerged and brought his axe up and hewed it into the front post of the hut, which crushed before his strength. He brought his foot down into it to break it down further and pulled down the roof with the axe more. The whole structure groaned and creaked and then was collapsed down onto the still burning fire. Take, damn you! He looked around and realized that if the fire didn't take the wood, he'd be completely in the dark. But the thatch of the roofing flickered a moment and then caught fully and flared to life. That's the warmth I have needed. An arrow could fly from the forest at any time, but he didn't concern himself with it now. The raider waited a time to let the fire build and stayed a moment looking at it. He knew the crew wouldn't carry on up the river tonight. He had time to stand here and enjoy the growing flame. Then he remembered that the old woman was under the wood, and he'd smell her soon. He turned to the village and saw other houses aflame. Many of the sailors were making their own fires to camp and stay the night here. Food had definitely been found with the gaiety and laughter he heard. He spent one more moment to look down at the flame he'd made and left to join the others. What is that fire there? Asked Ragnar. What did you find? I hope it wasn't food. No, Bottle, I found enough food there. I know that if I burnt any food, you would have me and killed by your hand. What then? Asked Inga. Just some shuck. He took the leather pouch from his belt and looked down at it, staring at it through an enclosed nasal helm. He removed the helmet and set the heavy steel down on the ground next to him. Bloody hell, man, Ragnar said. What scratched you up like that? He put a hand to his own face and pulled away a line of blood. That's a human nail did that. Is it no, laddie? He nodded. Many. Hand me that wine. They still had with them much of the wine from Miklagard, and Niels passed him a skin. Where is your horn? He asked. Still on the ship, wrapped in my cloak, with the rest of my things. I don't need my horn for raiding. Bodil, would you know what these are? He passed her the small leather bag. I found it in the hut there. She took the bag and opened it, looking at the contents by the firelight. It looks like some dried mushrooms. I don't recognize them, but this looks special. This is strong magic here, White Bear. Take you caution with it. Visions, he said, shaking his head and accepting back the bag. Always something I have to learn from outside the world. This earth will ne'er have a lack for things to teach you their black hair, Ragnar said. Still, it was a good raid. What did you find here anyway? Some grain, fish mostly. There was also much of a deer that we had been diced for storage. Probably that girl, he mused to himself. What? Asked Niels. The girl I saw probably hunted that. She aimed her bow at me. Oh, is that what you were doing out there? Asked Inga. Did she go willingly? You better not have forced yourself on her, White Bear. She ran. I wasn't close enough. She had the bow and was the one shooting at us, but she killed no one, so I didn't chase her. She was a Slavic heathen. Who cares? Asked Havvald. Women cares, Inga said, batting his face with her hand lightly. Menfolk don't understand what it means. It is a thing of the soul to accept a man willingly. She looked to the fire. For the honor, you mean? Niels said. The shame that comes from such sex is what you talk of? Nothing so simple as that. It is letting a man into yourself. Having that place forced on you is not something easy to allow when you know what it must mean. Bodil pulled her long knife from the sheath. I earned this knife when the man had made such a violence against me. The others looked between them, but said nothing. She noticed this, but did not look up. Thought to claim some pride and power by showing me a woman's place. I think I was too strong for his liking, and so he forced me to behave as a woman for him. This was his. I drove this knife deep through his belly and into his chest, making sure to miss the heart. She shook her head. It is not something women should allow to happen to other women. Have you heard of the laws that are set in the Iceland? It is a crime of high order there that can be set to outlawry or hunting to death. She nodded, then sheathed again the blade. I am sorry, Bodil, Niels said. I am not. No matter what has happened to any of us, it is what has made us who we are. I grew a stronger spirit for it. I know things that others do not understand. There is power traveling through the dark depths of life. And I am going to sleep. She sheathed the weapon. You haven't finished your feud, Fitbjorn said. So you have it. Eat well in my honor, and know that I accept your action. You did well in not hunting the girl down, White Bear. She patted the dagger. May the gods protect me from ever making Bodil the Mighty have cause to hate me, he said, raising the wine to her. She took it from him and left without a word. He stammered, but said nothing after that. After her. Give me more wine. The next village they attacked, farther up the river, and 5 days after the fishing village, had a ship they could use well for their purpose. It was not as large as the galley they'd taken from Miklagard, but it would serve their purpose well, and unclutter the long ship of supply and people. The settlement had been larger with more fighting men, and rather than dissuade the ship of raiders, it had excited their progress. Too long had it been where they'd not had a proper fight in the moment. When they were presented with the chance of one, they dove in. A flame. The smaller ship was obviously a local make and was dubbed the Little Slav. As it was smaller, they were also able to raise the sail and let the wind push most of the work, while the larger galley had too large a sail for the narrow river. The ships sailed together some more weeks, stopping at night for fires and drinking, or for more raiding to replenish the store of food. Ever they progressed as Viking warriors bound north for the hall of the good King Yaroslav. The summer months passed as they made for the court, and along the way earned no more loot from any of the raids undertaken. The villages and settlements along the river were not wealthy enough for anything but food to be taken. The placid and dense forest of the Slavic lands steadily grew darker and colder as they ranged farther and farther north. The world grew colder every day, it seemed, though the middle of summer raged above them. Many of the Northman warriors found themselves thanking the presence of heavy furs upon their back rather than sweating miserably beneath them. Those Romans who joined wrapped themselves tightly in thick tunic and leathers to fight the cold. Some wondered if they regretted their decision to join with them, but they never complained substantively. All the while, Fitbjorn ruminated on the leather bag and whether or not he should take the mushrooms within and quest again through the visions. He'd also asked what the word Diorin meant, and one of the old women kept the one that the old woman kept saying to him, and was deeply disappointed when he learned it was the word for fool. In the early fall, the ships came upon the narrow place of the river where the grand city of Novgorod stood, called Holmgard by the western Northmen. The grand castle and town around it were joyful sights for the traveling warriors who all cheered at the city. The bells of Novgorod were rung as Harald and his Vikings sailed on north-bound winds for the river docks. Here they were greeted with welcome and cheering. Their renown and fame was known already, and the sail of Harald Sigurdsson was as good as a banner to bring forth celebration at their coming. The ships were both docked and tied secure as the warriors all stood upon the solid earth in the city that was surrounded everywhere by enormous forest. They were all of them invited to go straight to the hall of the king, where he was waiting to receive his old friend. No one was needed to guard the ships, but everyone brought something with them in a great demonstration of their wealth and prestige earned during their time in the East. With riches and power both displayed, they made a procession to go and present themselves before the king. So that is the end of chapter 21. Thank you guys so much for listening and partaking. I have a lot of interesting, well, what I think are interesting thoughts about all the concepts, and yeah, there it is. Next time we'll be in the city of Novgorod itself, in the court of the good King Yaroslav.